This is BBC World News. I'm Laura Trevelyan, live in Washington, D.C. Our top stories. America marks the anniversary of the storming of the U.S. Capitol. Joe Biden blames Donald Trump for the riot, saying he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power.
The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle.
Donald Trump responds with a statement repeating false claims about the election and accusing Joe Biden of destroying the nation.
I'm Geetha Gurumurthy in London. The other headlines this hour. Kazakh security forces clear the central square in Almaty after days of deadly anti-government protests. And a court hearing on whether Novak Djokovic is medically exempt from Australia's COVID entry requirements is adjourned until Monday.
Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. The United States President Joe Biden has asked the people of his country to defend democracy from a future of political violence and election cheating, as he marked the anniversary of the January the 6th storming of Capitol Hill by Donald Trump's supporters. They were trying to stop the election victory of Joe Biden being certified. President Biden called on Americans today to ensure their nation wouldn't be one that lives in the shadow of lies and accepts political violence as a norm. Mr. Biden said Donald Trump created a web of lies around the lost election, something Mr. Trump has angrily denied. Take a listen to what Joe Biden had to say.
We must be absolutely clear about what is true and what is a lie. And here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest, and because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost, even though that's what 93 United States senators, his own attorney general, his own vice president, governors and state officials in every battleground state have all said he lost. That's what 81 million of you did as you voted for a new way forward. He has done what no president in American history, the history of this country, has ever done. He refused to accept the results of an election and the will of the American people.
And the US Vice President Kamala Harris also spoke out against the group which tried to storm the Capitol building. Here's a little of what she had to say.
What the extremists who roamed these halls targeted was not only the lives of elected leaders. What they sought to degrade and destroy was not only a building, hallowed as it is. What they were assaulting were the institutions, the values, the ideals that generations of Americans have marched, picketed, and shed blood to establish and defend.
Well, the US House of Representatives has also paid tribute to the officers who were harmed during the attack on the Capitol a year ago. The House Speaker, the Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, led this moment of silence in the chamber. A year ago, her office was among the parts of the Capitol which were attacked, and she herself had to take shelter from the people who had broken in. Now, Donald Trump was planning to hold his own news conference today about the events of a year ago, but he cancelled at late notice. Instead, he issued a statement after President Biden spoke, insisting that he had been robbed of the election, something which has been disproved in the US courts, and accusing Biden of destroying our nation and using his name to try to further divide America. Other Republicans in Congress who are keen supporters of Mr. Trump are planning their own news conferences in the coming hours. We'll bring you what they have to say as that happens. Well, let's hear now from one of the people who was caught up in the melee of January the 6th when those rioters stormed the Capitol building, and that's Harry Dunn. He was a police officer on duty that day on the Hill, and I've been speaking to him about what happened that day and what should be done about it. What was the most frightening and shocking thing that you personally experienced on January the 6th?
When I first saw the size of the crowd, you can see I ran around. I was on the east side of the Capitol. I ran around to the west side where you could see the actual mall, and the size of the crowd, the mob, and the intent that they had. They looked like possessed zombies. So when I got my first glimpse of the crowd, I had the overlook, and I had my rifle pointed out at the crowd. And at that moment, I said, I'm going to get shot. Because you see, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'7", and I'm there with this rifle, and I look like an easy target.
You experienced terrible racism that day too, didn't you? What happened?
I don't want to make January 6th completely about race. However, to deny that racism wasn't present that day is a complete lie. I got called the N-word. What I learned about when I came forward telling my story about what happened to me is that several other officers were able to share their stories with me about how they were called the N-word. So racism definitely was there that day. A lot of the people there were racist. That day was about people who have no respect for democracy and just don't care about their country.
We learned from the January 6th committee that President Trump was watching the events unfold live on TV in the private dining room at the White House. Do you think he should have acted sooner?
Any action by anybody, especially the president, that could have brought that situation to a quicker end should have absolutely happened. Anything, yeah, absolutely. There's actions that could have been done to get us help sooner.
What was the low point of that day as an officer?
That day is tough because I didn't really process a lot of what had happened while that day was going on. My day was basically filled with, let's survive and get home. I did have a moment to sit down once we got a little bit of help in the building and was able to reflect. That's when the infamous line was, "Is this America?" I was able to sit down with one of my friends and we talked about our experiences from that day. And I began to sob and I began to cry about not just what had happened, but I guess the state of our country. And it was very, very, very disheartening. And I would say that was the low point of that day.
Can you answer that question a year later that you posed? You asked the question, is this America? Was that America?
Yeah, it was. I think it's very irresponsible and dangerous for us to deny that part of America, because while it's ugly as it is, it's not something that we're proud of. It exists. That's part of who we are.
Do you think something like this could happen again?
Unfortunately, yes, I do. People are growing more and more angry about what happened and the way this country is headed. A lot of people are becoming more and more vocal about their views, which people are allowed to have. But once it becomes violent and destructive, then that's where you got to draw the line. But there's been nothing in place to stop that from happening again. So yeah, I do believe it could happen again.
And what to you is the lesson of January the 6th, of what happened?
Democracy can't be taken for granted just because it exists. You have to fight to protect it. Just as simple as that.
Capitol Hill police officer Harry Dunn speaking to me. Now, I've also been talking to Congressman Pete Aguilar, who's a member of the Select Committee here at the US Capitol that's investigating the attack. I asked whether they're still considering the possibility of a criminal referral regarding the actions of former President Donald Trump.
That's not our sole task here, and that's not the focus in front of us. It's on gathering as much evidence that we can find. And if there are things that other law enforcement agencies or organizations can use based on the documents that we gather, we're comfortable with that. We're comfortable sharing that. And that's part of telling the full and complete story. But our purpose is to make sure that this never happens again. And if there are any legislative recommendations or suggestions that we need to make, then that's what our focus is going to be.
And what's your recollection of that day? You were here at the US Capitol when that mob tried to storm the building.
I was here on the House floor as a member of Democratic leadership, and I was maybe 15, 20 feet away from the back door that ended up being broken. You know, my recollection was, and I keep a little notebook, you know, near me, and I didn't write a lot, but I did write that I was scared. And so at 2:34 p.m., people were being evacuated as leadership had been escorted out. You know, I knew something was wrong. At the time, I don't think all of us had the appreciation for how many people were outside of the Capitol. But we knew that it wasn't right. The police in the building had told us some measures that we might need to take, using gas masks and evacuating. And so all of us kind of took a posture to reach out to our families, but to also be very protective and to get ready for anything.
Do you think it could happen again?
You know, I think we're taking measures now to make the Capitol more safe. I think that there can be more done to help the Capitol police officers. But what I'm worried about is fundamentally protecting democracy. And I think that's what's important to convey is that we need to protect democracy, how fragile it is. And that a lot of things, you know, held up that day that might not have if some people would have made different decisions.
Does it trouble you when you see polls that suggest some almost 40% of Republicans think that political violence can be justified on occasion, and more than 20% of Democrats agree with that statement too?
It's deeply troubling. And I think it shows the kind of divided nature of the country. But you know, our job is to rise above that, is to tell the facts of what happened that day, and to hopefully instill some confidence in this democracy. It's so important to highlight the strength of our republic. We're not perfect. There are things we can do to strengthen this, but I think it's important to know that violence is never an answer. Making your voice heard, writing letters and talking to your constituents, absolutely. But violence should never be exercised in the pursuit of this democracy experiment.
And that was Congressman Pete Aguilar, who's on the January 6th committee investigating what happened that day, speaking to me a little earlier. He's a Democrat. Well, the Capitol invasion sent shockwaves around the world, and it was closely watched by both America's friends and rivals. We asked three of our correspondents who are in China, Germany and Canada to tell us how the events of a year ago were seen in their countries.
The latest evidence of a declining nation.
Questions raised about where the U.S. goes from there.
It sent a real shiver down the spines of many politicians.
It was not just the story of the day, but the story over a few days as really Canadians tried to make sense of what was happening to the United States, which is not just our closest neighbor, but probably our closest ally.
Perhaps in part because of this country's history, many Germans were just horrified by what they saw, and that was really reflected in the headlines at the time. Just looking at them, one newspaper described those scenes as sad and terrifying, caused by supporters of a delusional, voted-out president. More than one publication describing the event as an attempted coup.
Was it a big story? Well, it got the prominence that the propagandists here wanted it to get. And the tone of that coverage essentially was, look, this is the latest evidence of a declining nation.
Certainly in Canada, a lot of questions in terms of whether what happened south of the border could happen here, if the same forces were present at the same level, whether it be populism or organizations like the Proud Boys.
All of a sudden, Germany realised that tucked away on social media, the far right and conspiracy theories actually do wield considerable influence. And it sent a real shiver down the spines of many politicians.
There are genuine questions raised about where the U.S. goes from there. In terms of U.S. democracy, now I would say there's certainly a lot more attention being paid to the mechanisms of U.S. democracy.
Obviously, there are countless numbers of people here who aspire to what the US has, and it was seen as a national tragedy. But in terms of state-controlled media, And the narrative there, well, that was, look, this is what happens. This is the latest evidence of a declining nation.
And that was the view from our correspondents around the world on how January the 6th looked from where they are. And we'll be staying with this story in the coming hours. And there will be a special programme, an hour-long one at 2100 GMT with my colleague Christian Fraser. And you can catch up with everything online. We have a live page, and as the accusations continue to be made against former President Donald Trump for his role in what happened on January the 6th, this analysis by our North America reporter Anthony Zerka is about the 5 big questions still to be answered about Mr. Trump's role. Just log on to bbc.com/news or download the BBC app. So it is 1 year since the January the 6th attack on the US Capitol, when there was an attempt by supporters of President Trump to stop the certification of the election for Joe Biden. And 1 year on, we can see that America's divisions are still looming large because Democrats are leading this day of what they call remembrance and reconciliation, but top Republicans are not taking part and are actually accusing Democrats of using the anniversary to further divide the country. So this is America at this moment, 1 year on.
Laura, thanks very much indeed for bringing us up to date with the last few hours. Very big events, of course, 1 year on from that storming of the Capitol. Thank you very much for today. Let's go to Kazakhstan because security forces there say they have killed dozens of anti-government rioters in the main city of Almaty. At least 12 pro-government forces have also died in the protests, which were sparked by rising fuel prices. Now Russia is sending in troops following a request from the Kazakh president. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams reports.
After 2 days and a long night of violence, Kazakhstan's biggest city is bearing the scars. Almaty's presidential residence is gutted. Attempts to protect it clearly failed. This morning, troops were in action, firing live rounds. At who or what wasn't clear. With the internet down and very little independent media, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. The government calls this an anti-terrorist operation. It says dozens of people were killed overnight as they attempted to storm the city's police headquarters. It's a claim that's hard to verify. Kazakhstan's president is sounding tough, pointing the finger at unnamed foreign organisers.
Given that these terrorist gangs are international and have received extensive training abroad, their attack on Kazakhstan can and should be considered an act of aggression.
It's a claim vehemently rejected by the demonstrators themselves. They speak of long-standing, deep-seated economic and political frustrations.
When the president said he's at war with thugs, he called us thugs, terrorists. We're neither thugs nor terrorists. We participate in rallies. When he said that, I was deeply disappointed.
Russian troops and equipment have already arrived, Moscow responding to yesterday's call for help from President Tokayev. How they'll be deployed is not clear. Protests have now spread to other cities, including here in Kazakhstan's far north. Turmoil spreading across this vast country. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Now, men's tennis world number 1 Novak Djokovic is in a dramatic standoff with authorities in Australia after having his visa revoked on arrival in Melbourne for the first Grand Slam tournament of the year. Djokovic, who has said publicly that he's opposed to vaccination, gained a medical exemption by Tennis Australia from having to be double jabbed against COVID. But it was rejected by federal authorities on his arrival there, and he now faces deportation. Djokovic is currently in a government detention hotel. He's launched an appeal and will have to wait until Monday for the hearing. Shaima Khalil has the story.
The world number 1 arriving in Melbourne, ready to defend his Australian Open title, only to be told he's no longer welcome. After hours of being held at the city's airport, the border authorities said his visa had to be revoked because of a mistake, and Novak Djokovic was taken to a quarantine hotel. He came to Australia with an exemption, but he's been public about his opposition to being vaccinated.
On the issue of Mr. Djokovic, rules are rules. And there are no special cases. Rules are rules. It's what I said to you yesterday. That's the policy of the government and has been our government's strong border protection policies, and particularly in relation to the pandemic.
Scott Morrison's government has been under immense pressure over its handling of the pandemic, amid rocketing case numbers and chaos at testing clinics. All of this is happening with an election looming in the next few months. Djokovic's family say this is a political agenda and has nothing to do with sport.
That they are keeping him as a prisoner. It's just not fair, it's not human. So I just hope that he will be strong, as we are trying also to be very strong, to give him some energy to keep on going. I hope that he will win.
His legal team has challenged the decision, and a court hearing will resume on Monday. Outside the hotel, tension was high among his supporters. Even as they danced and the music played, you could feel their frustration.
I was pretty angry and disappointed and ashamed of being an Australian. I'm an Australian born, and for this to happen in my country, to discriminate like this and treat people like this that come from overseas, that have a medical exemption and haven't done anything that's bad, really. Just, he's here to play.
I don't think it is okay for him to have been dragged all this way for this spectacle to take place.
Novak Djokovic has landed in the middle of a controversy that has gone beyond tennis and is now at the heart of a political tussle between state and federal authorities. And while Mr. Djokovic and his legal team wait for a decision on Monday, confusion and anger are the overriding sentiments here.
Novak Djokovic was expected to go head-to-head with Rafael Nadal. A 21st Grand Slam title is at stake. And today, his rival didn't mince his words.
It's free to take their own decisions, but then there are some consequences, no? And of course, I don't like the situation that is happening.
For years, Novak Djokovic has dominated the Australian Open, winning 9 times. But his attempt at a 10th title may be over before the tournament has started. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Melbourne.
12 days after launch, the James Webb Space Telescope is ready for a critical stage in its mission, the unpacking of its giant primary mirror, the biggest reflecting surface ever sent into orbit. It's hoped it will detect the light from the very first stars to shine in the cosmos. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, is following the mission.
Travelling through space and getting ready for its mission to begin. The James Webb Space Telescope successfully launched nearly 2 weeks ago. It's a successor to Hubble and will revolutionise our view of the universe.
Webb has the potential to blow people away, even people who are used to Hubble. And I know that's hard to imagine, but the instruments are so powerful. The telescope is so powerful. Almost anywhere we look, we're going to be breaking new ground in a huge way.
The telescope is so big, to get into space, it had to be folded up like origami. It's been busy unfurling. First, its sun shield, which is the size of a tennis court. But now a vital stage of the process is beginning.
The mirror is the most important part of the telescope. Its 2 folded sides open up and lock into place. At 6.5 metres wide, it's so big that it consists of 18 separate hexagonal segments. They're made from beryllium, a stiff and lightweight metal that can withstand the extreme temperatures of space. The whole thing is covered in gold, so thin that the entire coating weighs just 50 grams, the weight of a golf ball.
Although it's made of segments, each one has to line up perfectly for it to act as a single huge mirror.
So each one of those mirrors, which is very lightweight, they have motors on the back which can move them up and down, tip them sideways, rotate them, and even slightly bend them to make sure that they have exactly the right focus.
The telescope will be hunting for the most distant stars and galaxies. But to do this, it doesn't use visible light like the Hubble Space Telescope. It uses a kind of light we can't see, infrared light.
Our universe is expanding.
And as the universe expands, everything in it expands as well, including light. When we talk about galaxies that are incredibly far away, the expansion of the universe has expanded the wavelengths of the light and moved the light into the red areas, the infrared.
This is an image of the pillars of creation taken by Hubble. It's a place where stars are born. But because James Webb uses infrared light, it will be able to see through this dust, showing us the multitude of stars that lie beyond. But all of this rests on getting the mirror fully opened and then aligned. Nothing this complex has been tried in space before. But if it works, by the summer, the first images should be sent back. And scientists say they'll be spectacular. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.
All pretty awe-inspiring, isn't it? There's much more, of course, online, and I'm on Twitter at Geetha Gurumurthy. Love to hear from you. Of course, do get in touch. Thanks for watching. This is BBC World News.